Welcome to Professionals and Coffee, a volunteer collective focused on boosting the professional profile of international and domestic students, newcomers, recent grads, and professionals through virtual coffee chats. My name is Carolina Salinas, and I'm a communication professional, founder and project manager of Professionals and Coffee. Today, I'm excited to have Mark Brosens, communication manager for the Archdiocese of Toronto. Before entering public relations, Mark worked as a journalist for 10 years at TVO, mainly as a producer for The Agenda with Steve Bacon. He also founded and was the regional editor for a local news project at TVO called Ontario Hubs. Mark has interned on Parliament Hill and for a public policy think tank. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts with honors from Queen's University in Political Studies and a Master's of Arts from Ryerson and York University in the Young Graduate Program in Communication and Culture. In addition, he developed expertise and during this current pandemic in PR as communication manager for the Archdiocese of Toronto by doing media and government relations and writing press releases. Undoubtedly, Mark Brosens' professional profile represents an excellent example of how it's possible to make a change in your career. In his case, switching from journalism to public relations by recognizing and taking advantage of the basic skill set necessary to become an exceptional PR practitioner. Welcome to Professionals and Coffee, Mark.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm curious how you got started working for and became the communication manager for this organization, for the Archdiocese of Toronto. Could you provide us guidance about it, please?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's kind of interesting about my career background is that I've kind of got a bit of a track record of getting jobs that on paper I wasn't qualified to get, which has been kind of like an interesting experience for me. Now, that's not to say that I haven't got every job that I've ever applied for. I've had lots of, rejections, stuff that hasn't come through. But I started off working in a very minor way in politics, both with Parliament Hill and in a think tank, and then I made the transition to journalism, which is something really difficult to do here in Canada, to go from a political background to go into like the neutrality of journalism, and then I went from journalism into public relations. What worked for me, I think, is a combination of, passion, interest, and networking, if I'm being honest. Those aren't kind of, revolutionary ideas. I think these are the things that people tell you to go do and to have in order to get a job. But for me, it really bore out. It was true. So when it came to coming into the Archdiocese of Toronto, I see myself as having networked into the job, and I'm a person who's loath to network. I don't really like doing it. My wife works for business school, and so she's all into these kind of things about, what you're supposed to do to advance your career, and she's always encouraging me to network. And it never works for me. It always kind of feels a little icky. But what I realized is I networked into the job that I have now kind of by accident. I was a journalist in Toronto. I was also, I still am, I was then a Catholic who was very involved in the church. And as a result of my coverage, the Archdiocese of Toronto, took notice of me, and I got invited to go to some events. I got invited to go to a journalist breakfast with the Cardinal a few times, and there I got to talk about my my involvement and my background with the Catholic Church and the things I've done. I helped lead a refugee resettlement group through my local church and these kind of things. And so when a position became available at the Archdiocese of Toronto, I was on a list of people who were contacted saying, hey, if you know anybody who would be interested in being a communications manager for us, tell them to apply. And I reached out and I was like, well, I may be a person who would be interested in doing that. And so, it was one of these things. When I got the job, my wife kind of said to me, you networked into this job by accident, sort of thing, right? And so I think that's one of the things to keep in mind, like when you're in the job search, is like networking can kind of feel icky sometimes, but there's ways to do it where it's authentic, right? Where you can meet someone and have conversations where you're not trying to like get to the like kind of sell point that you're trying to land a job, but just having conversations that will hopefully like put you on people's radar and lead to something else. I think like, that networking on top of my interest in what I'm working on now and my passion for this field is what helped me like stand out as well. And I think that's something that's important to think about as you're doing the job search is there's a lot of people out there who probably have your same skill set. And so the question becomes, if you're trying to get the job, if you're trying to advance your career, is what sets you apart from everyone else who has probably got a great resume and is going to do a great interview. And, for me, what's worked is, having talked to these people before I go into the interview and also having like an excitement about what is the position that's come up.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing these interesting facts. And have you found working for the Archdiocese of Toronto? How have you found working for the Archdiocese of Toronto?
Yeah, it's been great. I've enjoyed it. Now, with that being said, I've come into this position at one of the big crisis points in the history of the church, and so that has been quite something. My boss often jokes that he's like, neither of us knew what you were signing up for when you took this job, right? So like when I took this job, it was within the first month of me being on the job that Notre Dame Cathedral burnt down, right? And so my boss had stepped out to attend a funeral actually for someone in his network, and all of a sudden, like one of my colleagues comes into my office and is like, Notre Dame's on fire, and we got a call from this network and this network and this network. So like I've got my boss on the phone, and I'm like, I know you just got out of this funeral, but I've got 7 networks that want to talk to the Cardinal about what's going on with the Notre Dame. I think we need to do a press conference like now. And then we moved on to, there was the Sri Lankan terrorist attack, the terrorist attack in Sri Lanka on Easter. Then we had COVID, and then we had, the whole conversation about residential schools and the church's history in that. So my entire time with the Archdiocese has kind of been one that's been kind of crisis management all the way through it. So that's been challenging from like, a work perspective or work-life perspective, but it's been an amazing learning opportunity as someone who is only about 3 years into the field. I've got to touch a bunch of issues that are really contentious that need a lot of work. And, I think one of the things for your audience to think about when they're trying to decide where they're going to land themselves in their careers is there's very different places where you can end up in a public relations role, and they have different strengths and weaknesses. The strength of going into like what is like a comparatively small shop for a non-profit sector organization like the Archdiocese of Toronto is you get experience in everything. Like I'm doing everything from government relations to content management, to editing, to doing frontline phone calls with angry parishioners who are upset about like how like weekend church services went, marketing campaigns, you name it. So it's something to keep in mind when you're looking for stuff. You can go to a big organization and probably you're going to get a lot of specialization in a particular area probably pretty quick, and that can be good for you based upon what you want to do. Or if you want to go to a smaller organization, you're probably going to get experience doing a bunch of different other things. And depending on the career path you want to do and the skills you want to acquire, those options could have very different outcomes for you.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that you have made a good, when we are students, when we are at university or in the college, we want to to work in big companies. However, when you work for big companies, you don't have the opportunity to develop all your skills job searching. It's important to consider if they want to develop their skills, start looking for organization, small organizations, so that they can have the opportunity to develop their skills. Thank you. My other question that I have is, what has been one of your most positive professional experience in this company or in a role at another organization you could provide us?
Yeah, so I guess again, it kind of goes down to like what organization you're going to work with, and like how that's going to play out in terms of the issues you're going to touch. For me, I really like helping people, and I think that's a thing that probably goes across the PR and communications field. I think that we are probably temperamentally more people pleasers and agreeable people in a lot of different ways. I would think that's at least what I've seen from my interactions with other people in the industry. And so like, the things that have made me really happy is, when I've got to actually make a difference in people's lives based upon the connections that I have and what I can do. So like, every September we get the crises of people who can't get their kids registered at school, and it's like a 5-alarm panic for them, right? And they're just terrified because they don't think their kid's going to get into kindergarten or whatever. And the nice thing for me is I get to like just pick up a couple of phone calls, do some stuff, and solve these problems for them. It's not something that's directly related to my core job functions. But the nice thing about, I think this industry is you build connections where you can put people together or smooth out problems really quickly. And I've always really enjoyed that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your answer. Could we talk about some of the innovative communication strategies or tools you have developed for the Archdiocese of Toronto to tackle the impact of external communications?
Yeah, there's kind of a couple things that we could talk about there. One of the things that we did do that I led was in the 2019 federal election campaign. I helped lead a basically communication strategy that was attempting to get Catholic perspectives on public policy issues out into the public sphere. There was kind of this conception internally and externally that there was lots of Catholics who were out in society in Canada, but who didn't vote as Catholics, who didn't kind of consider their vote from a Catholic perspective. And as a result, like public policy issues that institutionally we thought were important, it was tougher to kind of get traction with those when we were doing government relations and talking to people. So I kind of led this campaign where I was talking about these are the issues that we think are important for Canadians to consider, particularly Catholic Canadians to consider before they vote. It culminated in a debate with representatives from 5 political parties in front of an audience of 1,200 people. And we had viewership online of in excess of 10,000 people. We were trending #1 on Twitter as we're doing it. We got news coverage about this thing in 4 different countries. So, that was a really great opportunity for us to kind of show the world in kind of like a, show performance kind of way that, there's a lot of Catholics out there who are willing to think of themselves when they're going to vote as a Catholic and have Catholic priorities, whether it be the environment or, poverty issues or life issues as something that is going to be animating their vote. And that's been really helpful for us in the, period afterwards in terms of showing politicians that hey, we're serious about engaging in the public square, and, we should be taken seriously when we're having these conversations about, any of those issues. So that was something that had never been done in the Canadian Church or in the Canadian religious sphere at that scale before. And, it was really cool to be able to make that splash and have people take notice.
Okay. Very interesting your answer, and thank you for sharing that. Yeah, undoubtedly very new. more for during these current times. My other question that I have is, what parts of your job do you find the most interesting as well as the most challenging?
Yeah. So like the most interesting is like, I think the reason why I've done all the careers that I've done in the past is I'm really fascinated in how things work and researching and figuring out how things are and why they happen the way they did. And the thing that I found really fascinating about at least my role in public relations is a lot of that, like researching and getting to the bottom of why a thing happened the way it did is really applicable with the roles I did. It's one of the things that really surprises me about my job is, in a lot of ways, the interviewing skills that I developed in journalism have been some of the most helpful practically for getting like on the ground information in terms of like why something happened the way it did, or really kind of getting to the bottom of why someone is upset about something. That's what I've always found interesting is that the understanding stuff. I've also really enjoyed like, you know, kind of the task switching kind of aspect of public relations, and like, you know, you don't have a typical day, at least not in my role. So there's, you know, a lot of things that pop up during the day. So I could start at this and then move to that and be somewhere else at the end of the day. So just in terms of my personality, that works a lot for me. Things that like I find like less favorable about my job is that you know, again, like I'm an agreeable person. I like to have agreements with people. And so one of the things that was kind of difficult for me to get used to when I was taking this job is that sometimes your job is to deal with someone who you're not going to agree with, and there's not going to be a resolution to it. And so you're just trying to come up with the best possible endpoint that you can get to with that. You know, you could put something out there that you think is very reasonable and helpful, and people could come back with torrents of criticism and anger and things that, you know, have nothing to do with what you're talking about, you know, sort of thing. So that's something that over time I've gotten more accustomed to dealing with, those kind of moments where there's not going to be the agreement between you and another person. And I think I've learned like some good lessons in terms of like how to deal with that, both at a professional and personal level, and also kind of some thoughts about like what that says about us as a society. So there's been positive out of that less favorable part as well.
Yeah, and I think happens in every kind of job or organization, right?
Yeah.
What has changed in this organization since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic? What has been something new?
Yeah, so one of the like it's stuff that's probably new for us in our organization that may not be as new for other organizations. So like from a workplace kind of perspective, you know, I think it's not surprising that it was more of a conservative workplace before the pandemic came, in terms of like, you know, working from home policies and things like that. Obviously, the pandemic has changed that radically in terms of like, you know, I'm in my home right now, and all of our staff pretty much are as well. It's interesting insofar as like, you know, you get crises sometimes that help you show what is possible. And so like that's been a neat thing to see, like the organization pivot from a cultural perspective. In terms of like communications perspectives and things, some of the things that we have had to do over the course of the pandemic that's probably not new to other organizations, but we made the switch really quickly because we had to, is going digital and digital engagement with our parishioners, our members, in a way that we hadn't done before. So like in the past, we were very much a, you know, you show up at the locations or churches, like and you do it at specific times, and we've got a captive audience, and like, you know, we can give them information, we can hand them things, they're going to hear stuff from us, they're going to put cash in the basket as we go around, and you know, that's great, that's worked awesome for us for 2,000 years. Well, it stopped working great for us once the pandemic came, because you couldn't go to our locations anymore. And so like our revenue coming in just collapsed after we closed the churches, and that was really scary times. And we lost our ability to tell our parishioners in a meaningful way what was happening. So some of the stuff that we did that was kind of neat as a result of it, and I think better for the organization overall, is we moved towards like pre-authorized giving is what it's called. So instead of putting cash in the basket and being a cash dominant organization, we have people giving credit card information to us so we can take money out of their accounts every month. And that's been huge insofar as creating a stable cash stream into our organization. It's even if you're a practicing member of our church, you're not going to be going to your specific church every week. You could be sick sometimes, you can be on vacation. So, we were getting numbers like a practicing Catholic is only going to their actual church 32 times over the course of the year. So, that creates big cash flow problems for an organization. Email direct marketing is probably the buzzword for it. But we did that in a huge way once the pandemic came because we had to. There were some negotiations around this in terms of satisfying Canada's anti-spam laws. But we have all these churches that have registration information in them. And 225 churches in our organization that was just being held locally. And so what we did was we amalgamated those lists of all the information we had. And overnight, we had an email list of in excess of 100,000 people that we could email whenever we wanted. And the results on that have been phenomenal. Like, we're not sending out emails that are getting less than half of the people that are sent the email opening it, right? Click-through rates are great, and it's just awesome. And so that's been able to be leveraged into other things. So at a point where we felt like there was a point in the pandemic where our churches were still effectively closed, but non-essential retail was open at 15%. Well, we leveraged that email list with the help of a public affairs company to basically email politicians to say hey, we want equity here. We want the same thing that the non-essential retail did. And because of the strength of that list, we got a phone call from a very high member of the provincial government within 4 hours of that campaign being launched. And they made a change I think over the weekend to give us equity. So, that's one of those things that's not huge for another organization to say hey, email your people. But for us, it was just such a thing that was lying around that we never engaged with, that it was really interesting to see the results.
Well, it's very interesting, everything that you are telling me, because I think that in general, all the organizations with this pandemic has forced you to think more, to use more your creativity, to be more with less, no?
Right. Right.
As a newcomer to this industry, not-profit organizations, what steps would you recommend I should take to prepare to enter this field?
Yeah, I think some of the things that I said from the outset in terms of what was successful for me would probably apply to anyone, that, do the networking, have the passion, understand the industry. It's a thing where you're going to be hired to kind of communicate to other people, what it is you're going to be doing in this industry. So if you can, hit the ground running, that's really helpful. The other thing that I think is just kind of helpful for people who are just starting out on top of that, have the passion, do the networking, understand the field kind of thing. It's just go out and do stuff, right? So I think there's a lot of the interview process is trying to figure out kind of who you are and what you can actually do. And so, even if it doesn't seem like a big thing to you, can you I'm thinking here in my town, we've got a great historical society that I'm in a smaller community in the GTA, great historical society. They have no social media presence at all. And there's a lot of good stuff to tell. And, the thing I've always thought is if I had the time, I would be the social media person for them and just do that. I don't have the time, so I won't. But if you're someone who's trying to start up and trying to show like, you can do stuff and you can be helpful, well, why don't you go to the social media? Why don't you go to the historical society if that's your thing and say like, hey, I'll do this stuff for you as a volunteer. And that builds you up a portfolio, sort of thing. Don't be afraid to like, just go out and like try to figure out how to do new skills, build those by yourself. Like, if you can go in and say, hey, I'm proficient in Adobe Creative Cloud, and proficient means a lot of different things for a lot of different people. But like, you can do that through LinkedIn Learning, and you can do that through YouTube videos. And there's going to be someone who is not doing that. And so if you can go in and say like, hey, I've made this mock whatever, and I can show you that, and I was able to do this in like an hour or something like that, that's going to go a long way. So it's one of these things that like doing and being engaged is better than not.
No, thank you so much for all these tips, for all this information. Believe me, it would be really helpful for us. Yeah, because as a newcomer, you don't know anyone, and it's necessary to speak by yourself, to show the world, and hey, I'm capable to do that. And my other question that I have is, what advice would you give yourself when you started your career? Maybe this is a little bit linked with the previous one, but if you would like to add something else, what advice would you give yourself when you started your career?
Yeah, I think one of the things for me is like if I could have gone back, like I was the first person in my family to go to university when I went to university, and so going to university meant a lot to me, and so I really like got engrossed in doing the entire university thing, and I wanted to do all the readings and understand them, and I really focused on that, and that was great insofar as that I got pretty good grades in the grand scheme of things. But one of the things that I think I realized in hindsight is that when you go in for like most job interviews or something like that, they're not going to ask you what your grades were. Like they're not going to ask you like, political studies 101, what did you get, sort of thing. And so like in hindsight, I wish I would have done a bit more of like, the like reaching out and just trying stuff. I was a bit of a perfectionist at that time. I still am, and I've worked on, making that less of a thing. But like in hindsight, like, man, I should have gone and wrote for the, Queen's Journal and done that, like based upon like how much like I had a great time doing journalism when I did that, right? I should have been involved in whatever society. I was just really focused on being good at school. So that would be the advice that I'd go back and give myself. The other bit of advice that I think is applicable to, everybody is, and I'll throw this out for the newcomers, is that like doing the job hunt is terrible. It sucks, right? It can suck. Like sometimes like, I got a lot of success, and, I'm lucky to be where I am, and how my career path has gone has been really good for me. But that doesn't mean that I didn't get rejected from a lot of jobs, right? And so one of the things that I've learned from going through the process of, being hired, but then also hiring other people, is that, the job interview process is a really imprecise thing, because hiring is really difficult. And so you go through this entire process of like doing a series of interviews, tests, personality things and all the rest of this kind of stuff, references and all the rest of that kind of stuff. And the little secret in that is like, the reason why they're getting you to do that is because hiring is really difficult, and there's a good chance they're going to make a mistake when they hire somebody. Like, so like they put in all these kind of checks along the way. So if it doesn't go well, they can say like, well, they did great on the assignment, and like, wow, the references were great, so I don't know what happened here. And so like, that's not to put anyone down who's involved with hiring, because like, I've been there, and it's really difficult, and you only have a small window of time of dealing with somebody when you're hiring. But that's more to say, like, don't take it personally when you get rejected from jobs, and don't take it personally when things don't seem to work out, because those people who interviewed you, they may not understand who you are, and they may not understand your skill set. You may have been the best person to get hired for that job, and it just didn't work out that time. So ask for the feedback, try to get better, do everything you can to succeed the next time. But I think for anybody, a big piece of advice is don't beat yourself up in the midst of a job hunt.
No, on the contrary, thank you so much for this piece of advice. It's a really big piece of advice, because sometimes we think that when we are rejected, we think that we did something wrong, but maybe no, there was not something wrong. Maybe we didn't have we didn't fill all the profile that they were looking for. Or maybe our answer was different. They were looking for another type of answer. Something else that you would like to add, Mark, to this interview?
No, I think that's everything for me. If you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Mark Brosens on LinkedIn, and I'm also on Twitter. Theoretically, I haven't had a lot of time to be on there lately, but I'm at Mark Brosens on Twitter. So feel free to reach out on either platform. Happy to chat.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much, and thank you for all your time and your patience. And see you on the next Professionals and Coffee Chat. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and our social media platforms, which are in the description below this video. And thank you, guys. Bye. See you in the next Professionals and Coffee Chat. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.